Good afternoon and welcome to the Senate Committee on Government Operations meeting for Wednesday, February 5th, 2025. We're going to lead things off today with more of the testimony about paid administrative leave. And why don't we go around the table again? I know there are two people that have been in before, but I don't think Nikki's been in before. So Senator Hart.
Yeah, Senator Larry Hart, Lawrence County.
Allison Clarkson. Hi, you two. Good to see you. Allison Clarkson, Windsor County District.
Brian Collmore, the Rutland District.
Jillian, the committee assistant. This would be Tanya Duhovsky, and I'm Senator Rebecca White.
So
we go to you always, just to know we always go to you.
It depends on whether we go clockwise or.
Well, we've always
I
gone.
renew it then.
We kind of shake it up, don't we?
Well, I guess we did
We did
almost
it.
today. Beth, who do we have with you and what are we going to hear about?
I'm Beth Fastige. I'm the Commissioner of Human Resources, and with me is our General Counsel, Thomas Waldman, and the Deputy Commissioner of Human Resources, Nikki Fuller.
Pleased to meet you.
Lovely to meet
Welcome.
you. How long? Yeah, how long has Nikki been with us?
3 years.
3 years, and how have we not met you before?
I mean, we may have met me on Zoom or
Oh,
something.
maybe.
Maybe.
Well, it's good to have you.
Right.
So the floor is yours.
Okay, well, what would you like to know about what we call temporary relief from duty? And I asked you about it during budget testimony, and I just talked about the things that there are. You said quite a few more questions, so I'm happy to.
Tanya had most of them.
Yeah, we're.
Well, forgive me.
Well, I'm happy to.
Yeah, Senator White, thank you.
So I think one of the reasons we wanted to hear from you was because, at least in the media, there's been a conversation about how long are people on paid administrative leave? Is that time something that could be shortened because a decision could be made about their status? Is there a cost to that? And are we actually serving the employees who are in the most tense of those situations effectively? So I think we have some concerns about the program, and if it's working.
And
They go in.
may I just tag onto that? The auditor was admiring of the speed with which you've dealt with these investigations of the paid leave, but is concerned that once those that investigation's done and it goes to the agencies and departments that oversee those employees, that then there is no time expectation for it to be dealt with, and there isn't any there's no. Anyway, I'd say that. I think he's also concerned that this in a year is over $1.5 million a year that we're paying people to not work, and with timeframes that are unclear. And I asked if there was consistency in terms of what was expected for when you were temporarily relieved of your work. And he said yes, that there were lots of consistent bars for that, but that once the investigation's over, I think their concern is that there's maybe not a consistent expectation of how it will be resolved in a timely fashion.
Okay, so those are a lot of questions.
Yeah.
Sorry, try to go from the beginning. So someone is generally put on temporary relief from duty, and I have Tom, obviously, he's our general counsel, and the investigation team works for them, and he kind of oversees the whole process. So he has a lot more details if I need assistance. So I appreciate it.
I'm here for you.
And Nikki also spends a lot of her time reviewing the employment investigations as well. So when an employee may have when we are looking into employees, allegations of misconduct, one of the tools that we have is, and we want to do at some cases, is remove that employee from the workplace, especially in a place where they may have direct public or direct client work, and we need to, once the allegations are made, we need to ensure that that workplace is safe. And also or also if there's issues potentially interacting with employees. So the appointing authority typically makes the decision to put that employee on what we call temporary relief from duty. So it's paid relief from duty, and that is their prerogative for the first 30 days. And after that, if we want that to continue while an investigation is taking place, then that's under my purview to allow that to continue. So while the employee is on temporary relief from duty, we start doing an investigation, which starts with information gathering. We'll do the investigation, and then once the outcome of the investigation is there, that's when we report the findings to the appointing authorities, who make the determination once they hear that and see the report of if discipline should be imposed. If number one, was there misconduct? Number two, if so, what type of discipline should be imposed, if any, and then through that whole process, making sure the employee has all of their due process. So all of those things in that process require a lot of people to be involved in those things. So when you're looking at an investigation, the investigator may have to interview multiple employees, look at multiple documents, the person who the allegations are against. So all of those things take time and scheduling. All those meetings need to be scheduled. Obviously, if the person's on temporary relief from duty, they should be pretty much available, but the other employees may not be, or who else. So, and then the same thing for that process. We schedule the meetings with the department to determine the outcome. And then once the appointing authority determines that they believe that misconduct occurred, they meet with there's a due process for that employee, and part of that process is called a Loudermill hearing. So it's the employee's opportunity to meet with the appointing authority and provide their side.
And I'll interrupt for just one moment. Only those matters where an appointing authority is contemplating serious discipline meaning discipline that affects an employee's property interest in their job. What's their property interest in their job? Their property interest in their job is their compensation. So if an appointing authority is contemplating serious discipline, which would be suspension without pay or termination or demotion, the due process requirements imposed by the U.S. Supreme Court since 1985 require that public employees be given notice and an opportunity to be heard. It's called a Loudermill meeting because the U.S. Supreme Court case that made that holding is the Loudermill case. It's decided in 1985.
Could you give maybe folks that are watching an idea, what are we talking about with appointing authority?
Appointing authorities are the agency secretaries, department commissioners, essentially, or their designees.
All right, thank you. Yeah, Senator.
And just to follow up on that, is it clear in the employee handbook what is a suspension without pay offense and what is a suspension, a temporary relief of duties?
No, it's not, because the collective bargaining agreement provides for something called progressive discipline. So when an employee is having when it's the first allegation of misconduct against an employee, the collective bargaining agreement requires that the lowest level of discipline be imposed. There are exceptions to that, but with each successive infraction, each successive investigation, each successive incident of misconduct, you go up the ladder. So you start with an oral reprimand. Then you move to a written reprimand. Then you move to a suspension. Then you move to termination. Demotion is sort of in between. But only those forms of discipline that implicate the employee's property interest in their job require the Loudermill due process notice and opportunity to be heard. So that's another thing that slows down the process because those meetings have to be scheduled. The union is involved, of course. The union rep has to be available. The employee has to be available. The appointing authority has to be available. It's a number of people that have to meet. And in those meetings, the employee has an opportunity to present any mitigating factors or information that they have, any disagreement with any of the findings or factual information that's in the investigation report, that's their opportunity to be heard. After that meeting takes place, that's when the appointing authority who's contemplating serious discipline has to make the decision.
And what's the time frame for that?
It varies from case to case. It depends on the complexity of the case and the difficulty that the appointing authority has in making the decision. There is no deadline. There's no imposed deadline. And the Department of Human Resources doesn't have the authority to impose a deadline.
Yeah, I think looking all that, I mean, the you know, having an employee that's not at work, it's a challenge for right, when you have somebody that's not working or either, you know, so when someone's on temporary leave from duty, it's not like you can just fill that job with somebody else. So there's work that's not being done. So I think the appointing authorities are certainly conscious of and so it's in their best interest, state's best interest for them to move them along as quickly as they can. For the Department of Corrections, they do have the highest number of cases of misconduct. So we regularly are scheduling various meetings with the Department of Corrections to be able to be very organized about the process, where when you're having a department that has, you know, that might have one case of misconduct at a time, or maybe doesn't have one for years and years. I mean, it's kind of a different trajectory. So
In the Department of Corrections, for example, there are meetings held fortnightly to review all of the misconduct matters that have been investigated and reports that have been completed within the ensuing prior 2 weeks. So, and at those meetings, the decision is made whether to impose discipline. And if the appointing authority is contemplating serious discipline, that triggers the louder no thoughts.
Did you have a question?
Me too. And part of it is, I think, a question for you. Part of it might be a question for the Department of Corrections, because if you're having to have meetings that frequently about misconduct, you're kind of wondering what's going on in the Department of Corrections. But so that meeting that happens to go over the last 2 weeks, at that point, no one's on administrative leave. That's going to be.
No, they could be put on administrative leave as soon as the allegations come in.
Okay.
If the allegations are serious, and if in the judgment of the appointing authority, it's in the best interest of the state, the best interest of, in the case of the Department of Corrections, the best interest of the folks who are in the state's custody, for that person to be removed from the workplace, that person will be removed from the workplace when the allegation comes in, pending the investigation.
And we have many investigations and misconduct investigations where the employee is not put on paid.
For example, in the Department of Corrections, a very common allegation of misconduct is that corrections officers are required to do visual checks in correctional facilities. Every X number of minutes, every X number, I don't know what the specific rules are. Those are Department of Corrections rules. But one of the very common allegations that we face or that come to us are that this correctional officer did not do his visual checks and falsified records indicating that he did. Those visual checks are very important, and they're to protect the safety of the people who are in custody. So if you have an employee who is alleged not to have done their checks and to have lied about it, falsifying documentation, to protect the people that are within the custody of the Department of Corrections, it is prudent to remove that employee from the workplace. And that's what the commissioner of the Department of Corrections does.
Okay. And they could be removed as soon as the allegations are made. It could be reviewed at this every other week meeting that looks at the last 2 weeks, and they might be put back. They might be escalated to. I'm just trying to get a flow chart of like what happens. And then if it's helpful, the follow up to that is sort of like, what are the percentages that we're talking about? You know, do 80% clear and go back after that 2 week check? Do 20% go on to be out of work for a year? Like, what's the numbers we're looking at?
I would say that meeting is not the 2 week check. That's just the meeting to go over all of the allegations of misconduct. So if there might be an investigations report that was completed that they might discuss at that meeting, and then any new cases. So there might be, there would be an agenda discussing multiple cases at those cases, is that
Right,
right? Yeah,
cases.
cases at.
Investigations.
Investigations at
I
those.
mean, an employee can be put out on temporary relief from duty when the allegation comes in. That triggers then the investigation is triggered. The investigations are completed for the most part within 80 days. When the investigation is complete, the case is considered at the next biweekly meeting. At that meeting, the commissioner of the Department of Corrections, in the case of the Department of Corrections, decides whether the allegations are substantiated by the investigation and whether discipline is appropriate. And if so, whether serious discipline is appropriate. If serious discipline is appropriate, the next step is the Loudermilk process, which is for the benefit and the protection of the employee.
And what percentage of these sort of, what are the numbers around how many are escalating to that lengthier process? And not just within the Department of Corrections. I'm just trying to understand, because my information on this came from the media, and I'm trying to understand what's the behind the scenes goings on. We're talking, at public millions of dollars, but what does that actually mean? Are we talking 10 people? Are we talking 20 people? Are we talking 300 people? Like,
I don't know the answer to the
I have,
question as I sit here.
So we have, every year we do a certain number of investigations of those. There's a percentage that are put out on the temporary relief committee. So we don't have a stats that's separating that out. I would say, I don't know if you anecdotally you could.
It varies from department to department, and it varies depending upon the seriousness of the allegations. And I would say this, in departments where employees are charged with responsibility for care and custody of folks who are under the state's care, for example, the Department of Mental Health, the psychiatric hospital in Berlin, or the correctional facilities, the percentage of people who are put out on temporary relief from duty is probably higher.
But last year we actually, we had over, Tom's team did over 200, completed over 200 investigations, which is higher than usual. And our numbers for the amount of money paid on, I didn't actually pull them right before, but last time we pulled them was actually for that story and was about $2.6 million for 2024. It's going to be a little more because didn't have all the pay periods in it, but it's slightly higher. And that was the 3 years ago. I think we had went over that $2 million mark. It had been typically lower, but it does vary from year to year, and it's based on how long individuals are out, potentially what their salaries are, and how long they're out for.
Right. If you have a very high level person who's out, obviously it's racking up greater expense than if you have a very low level person with a lower compensation. And no one is happy about paying people not to work, but it's a provision of the collective bargaining agreement that was negotiated between the employer, the state, and the VSEA. So these are the rules that were negotiated. This is what we abide by.
Senator White.
Thank you very much for explaining this. Besides the auditor that we heard from in the news stories, I was not familiar with this problem or the existence of this process. This is like the iceberg that I didn't know below workplace toxic safety federal laws that I'm sure you all have to deal with. But I think there are concerns in the community about how it's working. And so my question would be less, you're doing something wrong, how do we fix it? But more, that's probably a symptom of there's not enough resources for these folks, or there's something that's we are lacking some support rather than there is a process that is or isn't working. And I'm wondering, are there resources that you're missing that could be helping prevent either misconduct from happening to the degree that it is, or more folks who are doing all of the scheduling and trying to sort this out? Because I think you're right. No one wants to pay for someone who isn't working. And they certainly, if they've done nothing wrong, don't want to be not working. that time that someone spends away from their coworkers can actually be extremely difficult. And if you're in that situation, I can only imagine if you had something that was inaccurate, how difficult that would be too. So I'm wondering, what can we do to help resource you better?
I think there's just a couple of things. I mean, one of the things that we're always looking at in our department is how can we improve this process? Over the past 2 years, one of the things that we did was to help the appointing authorities make decisions quicker was that we now have findings to make it easier for them to understand the investigative report and a recommendation, as do we believe that misconduct occurred or not? And if so, under what policies, like what policies were. So that I think has been helpful in trying to move
And
cases
if I
along.
can just
Yeah.
clarify that a little bit. Our investigators don't make legal conclusions.
Mhm.
They only make factual findings.
Yeah.
The legal conclusion of determining whether or not the facts support a conclusion that a policy was breached, that determination is made by the appointing authority, who essentially sits as judge and jury in these cases.
Wow.
Senator Clarkson.
So negotiated, it sounds like lots is negotiated in this arena in the contract with the VSEA.
Yes.
Was the time frame for the investigations negotiated and why? No. So one of the things I heard the auditor say was that he was pleased there was a time frame on your side. Why is there no time frame negotiated on the other side, once it hits the agency and department, the authority?
The
What do you call it?
timeframes
What do you call
aren't-
it?
Right, the timeframes are, for me as appointing authority, I give Tom targets and goals so that he can measure the performance of his team. In that sense, let's say that the goal is 80 days. We know that there's going to be investigations that are going to take longer than that, particularly. So we know that there's going to, but we also know there's ones that they can do quicker.
Yeah.
So it's just a benchmark that we're looking at. And if he meets it, then I'm going to make it harder. So,
And she has. And I give her a lot of pushback, and I always tell her that a misconduct investigation is not a widget that's manufactured on an assembly line. Each investigation is different because each one presents a different set of facts, has a different number of witnesses. There may be documentary evidence that needs to be reviewed and summarized. To impose an arbitrary deadline, it's just that, it's arbitrary. So we do our very best to meet that 80 days, and my investigators do an excellent job.
That is what the auditors.
Yeah, I was very happy to hear the auditor say that.
Exactly,
yesterday.
and I was too. My concern is on, once you delegate the authority back to the agencies and departments, why we can't negotiate with the union a time frame for that.
we certainly wouldn't want to negotiate a time frame for any of that based on what Tom said, whether it's our investigation timeline or the investigation that wouldn't make sense to have to have a timeline negotiated. Then what would be the remedy if we missed it? Like that would.
So how do we improve the timeliness of the results?
I think
that's the issue.
That's a great-
How do we
that's a
improve
great
the
question.
timeliness?
It's a great question.
So that's, I think, my question. How can we improve the timeliness of the conclusion of this termination?
I think
Not
that
termination, timely.
we really want, looking at each case at a time. Some are resolved relatively quickly and some do take longer, and sometimes they're very difficult decisions as well. And between the imposed discipline, the Loudermill meeting and the imposed discipline, the appointing authority has to determine what's appropriate, and also is going to has to see what's going on. If misconduct has occurred in the past, what's happened for other, something similar types of misconduct within their agency and department. So there are facts for them to consider.
Well, any time that an appointing authority is considering discipline, before they impose the discipline, under the law as determined by the Vermont Labor Relations Board and the Vermont Supreme Court, the appointing authority is required to weigh 12 different factors. And I can't recite all of the 12 factors for you here, but they include things like the employee's performance, the employee's prior disciplinary record, the likelihood that the employee can be rehabilitated, there are 12 of them, factors that need to be considered. And every appointing authority, we tell them they have to consider all 12 of those factors in making their decision. When in cases where serious discipline is going to be imposed, the appointing authorities issue a written 12 factors analysis that's prepared. They rely on us to assist them in preparing it. But it's their document, they sign off on it. And that sets forth the kinds of things that the auditor was speaking about yesterday, where yesterday the auditor said that he was troubled that prior discipline isn't considered. In that, he's wrong. Prior discipline is considered. It's one of the 12 factors. So, these are really difficult decisions that weigh very heavily on someone's livelihood potential. So they can't be made hastily. They have to be made deliberately.
Senator Bielanski.
So two things. It looked like Deputy Commissioner Fuller might have wanted to weigh in. And so if you do, I want to make sure you get a chance to.
Thank you. I appreciate that. My comment simply was going to be, wow, all this is true in terms of the process and the time that it takes. But I do think there is an opportunity for us in working with appointing authorities to encourage a set of timelines saying, because everybody's very busy. And what happened, I've observed anyway, anecdotally, that there are some that just sit around and sit around and sit around. And I think it's just who wants to get to that? There's too many other things to do.
That's absolutely
And
right.
they don't get to it. And I think that by us engaging in a, solid teamwork so we can get this done and say to them, look, hey, you got it. Let's set a timeline. We'll get some sort of system where we're sort of staying on top of those. Because once we get past the investigation, we don't often see much of what happens beyond the Loudermill piece that we do. So I think by remaining in that conversation with them, we can maybe see some improvement. And there's a second thing I wanted to say was, now I forgot, I'm sorry. The second thing we were talking about something, what was it?
It's been a good conversation.
So timeline, that's helpful. You can clarify. You're right.
Right, so there was something else we should do. Oh, well, we did.
Oh, no, you talked about supporting the employee at that.
Yeah. Yeah, you asked, that's what it was. You asked what resources do we need?
Mhm.
And one of the things that I personally think, and Beth knows, I've talked about this ad nauseum, about the need for us to have people in HR who are well-versed in performance management. And we don't have that. And I just think we've moved to a more employee-oriented HR where our job isn't just to support the appointing authorities, but it's also to support employees.
Yeah.
And we support employees when we have performance management specialists who can help appointing authorities understand when something really should be a performance matter and how do we help this employee become a success. The problem is everybody's so busy, they don't care, they send it for misconduct or whatever the case might be, where it could very easily have been something that with a little bit of work, this person gets on the right track.
And one of the
We can't
things,
afford to move down employees.
and one of the things that my team does, along with the labor relations group, is that when allegations come in, we look at them very carefully. And if they are, if in our judgment, they are allegations about poor performance, we refuse to investigate them as misconduct because there's a whole separate process for managing performance. Sometimes it's very easy for a manager or supervisor in a department or agency to say, oh, this employee isn't performing. They did X, Y, and Z. They didn't abide by this process or this procedure. They'll send it to us as a misconduct allegation, and we'll send it back to them and say, hey, this is performance. It's not misconduct. You need to put this person on a performance track and manage their performance to get them to perform appropriately and adequately.
So I could just jump in, and I know we have two in the queue now. So I'm getting a sense that if someone's habitually late
Yeah.
or doesn't file reports in a timely manner, that's sort of one track of this and doesn't rise to the level of misconduct.
Well, perpetually late could rise to the level of misconduct.
Okay,
If an employee.
I'm trying to give you an out, Tom.
I mean, if an employee is habitually late, and if an employee receives feedback, you must be here on time, or you must abide by these guidelines. You know, these are the performance expectations. If after receiving that kind of feedback, they're still habitually late, that could be misconduct.
Okay,
Especially in a situation, let's say, in a corrections facility where you not coming in means
Yes.
the other
Someone else has to
person
stay.
who's already been working 12 hours
Yeah.
has to stay
Yeah.
until like, you know, so, they do have consequences where in an administrative role, so if, you start at 8 and the person comes in at 8:05, but they end at 8:00, and then a day 5 minutes late, it's more flexible, but especially when you're in a structured environment and there's clientele or customers waiting on you, it's, so that type of thing, while you think it might not be a big deal,
yeah,
we need to correct that action. And if it's not being able to be corrected through performance, which they should have opportunity to do that. First time you're late, you shouldn't have to go for misconduct, right? So,
No,
but
if you're late every day or every
Right.
other day.
Senator Bielska.
So, I mean, I could probably travel down this path for a while because you answered part of one of my questions, which was sort of how often do those sort of performance issues then rise to the level of misconduct? Because they weren't, to your point, sort of dealt with preventatively. And I recognize you don't have numbers, but it sounds like you've already sort of pointed to that absolutely can happen. But my other question, so the auditor testified yesterday, I think that he made 6 or 7 recommendations and 3 of
Yes.
them were just not implemented. And I'm wondering if any of them have since been implemented. And
Right.
if not, why not? And I will admit, I have not read the auditor's report yet to know which 3 those were.
I can address that
Okay.
because I was involved in the follow-up to that auditor's report where every year the auditor's office would ask us, have you implemented these? And every year we would say that we've partially implemented some, we've implemented some, and there are some that we have not implemented and are not going to implement. The auditor said yesterday that we didn't provide him with reasons why we weren't implementing. That was incorrect. We did provide reasons. So, one of his recommendations was that we impose a deadline on reporting authorities
Right.
to go to what Senator Clarkson was talking about. And the reason that we gave to the auditor was DHR does not have the authority to impose such a deadline.
Right.
So there's the reason. And the auditor said we didn't give a reason. We absolutely gave a reason.
But it could, to go to your point, it sounds like you could give a recommendation.
Yeah.
And do you do that now, Chief?
I would say that we
It's
are,
not
that
usually taken.
the answer to that question is yes. When there are cases that are lingering for a long time, I'm in
They
touch
must
with,
drive you nuts.
I'm in touch with DHR field staff and I ask them to please, talk to the appointing authority, see if we can get this case moving, see if we can get it resolved.
and in the case,
But that's all we can do.
and if the case that they're not comfortable or they're Nikki or I are here, it's like, we certainly are available and can intervene and talk to that appointing authority if need be. So our field team knows that. But it's, sometimes it's, if something's been waiting a long time, it is a difficult conversation. So that's one of the reasons why it's something that we can do as leaders.
Some of the recommendations that we partially implemented, we only did partial implementation because full implementation would be a waste of resources. We have limited resources. We have limited personnel. One of the recommendations was that there be a written 12 factors analysis for every case where misconduct where every case where discipline is imposed. We simply don't have the resources to do that.
So I think Senator Lopez.
I just wanted to follow up on your point, which is that something that's in the budget? Like, do you need more staff to support the performance related tract being used more than just the going to the misconduct because there's not, someone has not been guided, so it's becoming misconduct because there's not someone to help steer the ship? Like, where did that live in your budget, and could we ask for more of those people?
Yeah, I think
not that you were asking for that, but let's say I had a great idea and I thought we should do that. Where would I put that in the budget?
In their budget.
So we put it in, is it a line item we can ask for or advocate for?
Right, you would ask for more positions in the DHR budget. I am satisfied with the budget that the governor has proposed. And I'm not advocating for more positions in front of this committee today.
Yes, I completely understand what
I
you're
can
saying.
understand that any appointing authority is gonna say, I mean, anyone's gonna say, if we have more people, we can accomplish more.
Yeah,
Yeah, there's not, but we have to weigh all those decisions with all the needs across state government. So there's not an appointing authority that would say that with more resources that they could do something better or faster.
you make a good point. Thank you. I appreciate that. I think we would like to discuss that probably in the long term.
Sure.
So.
Mickey?
I'm not disagreeing with that. But what I was going to say is that we have found in our professional development group, CAPS, that they are getting lots of requests for help around performance management. So to the extent, whatever resources we need for that, the reality is that we need it. And it's not HR that needs it, it's, appointing authorities need it and employees need it to be able to be successful. So the argument is that we want to see people be successful, and we do need to work on developing this performance management sort of module where we can be available to appointing authorities and say, hey, what's happening here? How can we make this work? And sometimes it may not work, but at least we were making the effort to keep employees.
Senator Clarkson and then.
Well, given our sort of, I'm not trying to call it an emergency, but certainly a workforce challenge, crisis even maybe,
Yeah.
that we have 2 jobs for every 1 worker available at the moment. I think it's incumbent on us to do as much performance management as possible, because every worker for this state is precious. And every worker needs to know that we want them and we don't want them leaving. I mean, we're having a hard time filling jobs. And it strikes me that in terms of cost saving, I would love to see the data over the last, and I assume you have this, over the last 5 or 10 years on the number of paid administrative leave. I mean, if you have over 200 last year, that's a huge amount. I mean, it strikes me that that's a lot of,
So I think that was the number of
That's the number of
investigations.
that's a number of investigation. So how many, could you get us the data on the number? Because it sounds like it's
Yeah.
growing, the number of paid.
I think that ebbs and flows. It ebbs and flows. So it did grow last year.
So you don't see a steady trend of it growing over the last 5 years?
We've seen it increase and then a dip, and then, so there's it's not, there's not a consistent upward trajectory, I would say.
Okay,
That's good.
but it does strike me in our workforce climate that we're in at the moment, that it makes sense to invest in keeping people, resolving differences, improving performance, instead of spending a lot of state money
And
having.
right, and the vast majority of state employees are never put on pay relief from duty. It is a very small percentage of state employees. Unfortunately, it is a cost that that as a public employer and with the collective bargaining agreements that we have, and with the legal requirements, that's the reality of the work we do and the important work that our employees do and the responsibility that they have. I mean, so that is a reality, and we're never going to get rid of that. And I would say on the performance side of it, I couldn't agree with you more that supporting our employees is a critical mission for HR. We do have, I mean, each department has agency has a team of DHR employees that support them in these efforts, and they also have their own teams that are supporting them. But to the extent that we can do more to support supervisors and how they're managing their teams, that's something that we're looking at all the time, absolutely all the time.
How do we compare to other states in terms of the number of people on paid relief from duty?
I don't know.
Senator Bielski.
I don't know.
So
I would say that, likely there are states that don't have. There are states where it is. There are more employees that would be at-will employees instead of classified employees. So that they don't have that property interest in their job. I mean, I don't think they can fire without cause, but they might not have to go through the extensive process that we always have to go through. Especially where, in areas where they don't have even organization. Like that, kind of anecdotally.
So I fully appreciate, and I'm not trying to challenge you to ask for positions. I want to be very clear. I hear you, that that's not what you're doing and you would never.
Oh, I did. I got positions a few years ago.
Okay. But I guess
Jeanette went in and
my sort of question, and I also want to say that like if someone's put on administrative leave, they deserve due process. And so I don't actually have a
Right.
problem with paying people while they go through that due process, but you know, $2.5 million is a lot of money. And so I guess I'm wondering like how we find the balance between investing in our workforce and your office and our appointing agency so they prevent people from going into that system. And that, like recognizing that number's never going to be zero, but like, are we at the right balance? And I don't know where we.
Yeah, I don't know. And I don't know if it's at these cases where we actually put, that investment of people to, to support the organization as a whole. It's still what we were talking about, maybe more structural and, developing better training, having employees that were specialists within the department that would be, hey, we have additional expertise to help you, or we have additional people. So when you're asking for help, we're going to help you, be able to help you right away instead of having to wait longer. So I'm not sure structurally, do we put that in, that I think those are kind of two separate tracks. That's not the track to move to have the decisions made any quicker or speed that process up. I think that is more, as Deputy Commissioner Fuller said, really engaging with the appointing authorities and trying to help them, give them what they need to be able to make the decisions so I think that's really where we are. One other thing, that hasn't been mentioned is, there is the appointing authority making the decision. Let's say the decision is they decide to, terminate or suspend an employee. There's an opportunity for a grievance. Once the discipline's posed, there's an opportunity for grievances and taking the disciplinary action to labor board. But there's also times negotiation between the employee and their labor representative and the appointing authority in those cases as well. And so those negotiations can also take time. So that is also can be a part of the process. So if you're looking at negotiating a settlement, where discipline is imposed or it's not, potentially the employee might choose to resign. Or go back to the workplace and, whatever that outcome is, those take time as well.
During that process though, of like a grievance or challenging the decision, they wouldn't still be out on paid administrative leave, right?
Well, no,
Like if
if-
discipline's been imposed.
If discipline's been imposed, if employment has been terminated, obviously they're off the
Right.
payroll. They filed a grievance and they're no longer on the payroll.
Right, that's,
But rather than having the grievance, there might be an opportunity to negotiate that prior.
No, before a disciplinary decision is made, there's always the opportunity to negotiate a resolution, where the employer will offer a lower level of discipline than may have been contemplated in exchange for the employee agreeing, okay, I'll take that penalty and I won't challenge it. They give a general release in exchange for a lower penalty.
okay.
And we love that, frankly, because resolves cases more quickly and it provides finality.
Senator Clarkson.
One of our charges is to retain our employees in, recruitment, retention, attraction. Is what we're working on in workforce development. And I'm just curious if this might not be some piece we could be adding to our workforce development bill. In the retention part. I'm just curious if you'd be willing. I know you have to go the party line in terms of the governor's budget, but I appreciate that. But I also know that there perhaps has been a need identified, and for this number of employees, it would be interesting to know how many preventive management, and I don't even know what the right title is, would be preventive. Mediators, there are a lot of different titles we could, I don't know how many for this size workforce we need to try as a pilot to see if it actually affected and improved financial outcomes to the state and performance outcomes to the state for employees.
Yeah,
As a pilot.
I think it really starts with support for supervisors and having them, and we have a course called Supervising in State Government 1. All new supervisors are required to take that class. And part of that, they talk about performance management in that class. And employees it just starts with basic conversations with your employees and setting objectives and holding employees accountable. And if they're not, how do you get them? What kind of support they need to get there? So even just starting from having those conversations, encouraging employees to do the performance evaluations and talking to employees about their performance more than just that once a year during a performance evaluation. So even just kind of the basics and getting people to do the basics, I think goes a long way to improving how we are.
Are they not doing the basics now? Maybe not.
I would say that it varies by supervisor, and we have a very, it's a high level. Our supervisor, so we have, if you have 2 reporting employees, you're considered a supervisor. You also get a pay bump for being a supervisor. So there's a lot of people that not a lot, but sometimes people will rise to a supervisory role, not because they're that interested in supporting the employees, but because they're going to get paid more, which makes sense, right? You should be paid more if you're going to be supervising employees. But then the other part of that, the actual supervision part, and even when they take that job, there might not be any supervision. The employees, a small number of employees, they're independent employees, they've been doing the job. But then when a new employee comes on and they're responsible for training that employee, they may have never done that before. And we need to make sure we're supporting them to understand the importance of doing that in a way that is going to be, that the employee is going to be receptive to. And it's not the same for everybody. There's not, our employees aren't cookie cutter employees, and different employees need different types of support. So really supporting those supervisors and how they manage their employees and make, and make sure we have the right people in those roles is important.
Yes, Larry, I saw. Yes. Deputy Commissioner, want to weigh in, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. In my experience, this is not unusual for state government. The reality is most people end up in leadership because they're just thrown into leadership. So they're going to leadership and then they don't know how to lead. And so that's not beneficial to employees. It's why you usually have chaos, you have turnover as a result. So my proposal, which I proposed to Beth, is that when and if we get to having this performance management specialist team, the goal would be to not just do performance management, but also how do you lead? Better leadership gets better outcomes. And also the other role they can play, which brings us back to the TRDs, is that when people are out on TRD, sometimes they're out for a while. And when they come back, it never works out because no one has had a plan but how do they reintegrate into the workplace? And it doesn't even have to just be because they are in TRD. Sometimes somebody may have been out sick for a while. Or see, there could be all kinds of things. Maybe they went out on, military duty and then they come back. The performance specialist would help reacclimate that person and help their leader, their supervisor, be able to help them. So the purpose is really many-fold for this position. It's not just one, just to do TRDs.
Right.
Got it.
Yeah.
Got it.
So,
And Larry.
No,
Oh.
I just had acknowledged her.
Oh, okay, he was, okay.
so I'll use my magic wand question. Apart from anything that might have a fiscal impact on this year's budget, let's dismiss that. We're not going to talk about that.
No money.
If the three of you had a magic wand and could change anything else that exists currently in the system, and I don't mean to put you on the spot unnecessarily, but maybe, and Nikki's kind of brought it up, and that was a really good sort of starting off place, I think. Are there things that you can think about that maybe we can help, maybe we can't, maybe it's internal, but that you could do, and training, I think, is essential for this. And that's what leadership is all about, is helping people along through a process until they get to a certain point. So I'll just leave it there. If you, like we used to have on the password show, I pass on that question. That's okay too, but I want to at least give you a chance to suggest anything if you had the power to do
I'm passing on that question.
it.
But I have a very good reason. My role is not that. My role is to deal with the flood of allegations of misconduct.
Okay, that's
that come in. So I'm all for doing whatever can be done to prevent there from being incidents of misconduct. I would, that would be
It
terrific.
goes back.
But that's not my job.
Okay.
Oh,
That's,
that's
I'm not
great.
sure.
That's a good answer.
I'm not shirking, but
no,
I
that's
would-
fair.
No,
It's a very
but
good.
you just used the word flood, so there are lots of them.
Oh.
And we would love to have you have fewer of them.
Yeah.
no one
And that
would,
goes back.
no one would love to have fewer allegations of misconduct.
Thank you. I know, I'm actually clear on that,
Great.
but it goes back to Nikki.
You wanted me to say something?
Only if you choose to.
What's your
Oh.
magic
Are
wand?
you raising your magic wand?
I'm not gonna.
Yes. In this hypothetical.
She's quite a visionary.
I love it. I think I've said what I think we need. And I think ultimately, if I can do anything with Magic Wand, it would be to focus us more on relationships, and focus us more on the individuals, because government can get very, I know I'm on my soapbox, but can get very like the process and forget about the people. So to me, I just wave that wand, and if everybody started thinking about how do we make things better by focusing on people, I'd be very happy.
Senator Mihalski.
I so appreciate that, and I appreciate, the fiscal concern of the year. And I think a lot of times we forget to look at what the cost of doing nothing is. And sometimes it takes investment in doing something different to save money, doing what we're doing right now. Because I too would like to see less of these, I'd like to see us preventing these things from rising to this level. And if it's building relationships and potentially investment in doing so, I think that's money well spent on saving money going to people who are out on long leaves who aren't able to work.
Exactly. It's sort of what I thought I said when I thought about it, which is, we can retain and prevent that. Those are wins. And have happier employees.
And Senator Clarkson, I think you asked me last week what my big asks for this committee were. And my big ask for this committee is to support our request that is in the big bill for $1.575 million to revamp our classification compensation system. So we've been asking for funds to do that work for quite a while. And we have support to move forward in that project, and we're poised and ready to do that. And I don't even think we've talked about it since Senator Steve Hofsky Way had been on the committee, but Senator Calmer, I know has been in the past, has heard a lot about our system and the some of the changes that we would like to make. And we're happy to come back and talk to you further going forward to support that request.
And that is in the budget.
That is in the
That's
budget.
not in the BAA, that's in the big,
The
The
big
big
one.
bill.
in the big, so
And you had asked me last,
I did it.
and I said to be determined because I wanted to make sure it was in the budget.
And it was in the budget.
And
I think because the chair of this committee goes in and advocates generally for the asks that come
Yes.
through this committee. I think it would be great if we'd make some time later, once the budget.
Sure. Love to have you back.
Yeah.
And we appreciate you taking time and answering some of the questions that came up yesterday from our auditor
Yeah.
and earlier questions from the committee.
And it is, just in general, it's not something that, it's not really kind of a private sector thing. So when, somebody that isn't working for government and kind of doesn't understand, that due process that our employees do have, it seems very strange that, this is a cost of doing business in our, in this world in state government. And we certainly, we're all taxpayers and want to make the best use of taxpayer money. So it's something that we are very committed to making that process as efficient as possible, keeping in mind employees as well as the needs of the state. So it's a balancing act, and it is a lot of work. And on the team that really works on this all the time, I've got 6 full-time investigators, got Tom and his team of 3 attorneys, plus we have 34 employees that work in our field services group. So those, many of those employees are involved working through the process of misconduct and working with appointed employees on that and our whole labor relations team. So it is a lot of work, and we put a lot of time and effort on our side into it. And I don't actually mind talking about it because it's a result of some hard work that our team really does, and they try to do that for the best outcomes of the state as well as the employees. So.
Okay. Anyone else? Yes, Senator Hart.
Just for you, general counsel. What is the largest amount of allegations that come your way? Is it because of neglect to work in the correction facility? Is it for aggressiveness? Is it?
That's a really hard question to answer. I mean, it really runs the gamut, and it runs the gamut, not just from the corrections department, but from all of the departments in state government. I mean, I can't really say what's the most common allegation. I mean, one common allegation that we get is that people are behaving unprofessionally. Unprofessional conduct. They're not treating their coworkers well. They're not being respectful towards their bosses. They're using profanity at work. I mean, those are very low-level offenses. And frankly, people that engage in that kind of conduct are rarely put out on temporary relief from duty. We get a lot of those. And most of those, or many of those, we turn back to the departments and say, this person needs feedback, needs coaching. This doesn't need to be investigated.
And
Thank you all.
do you deal with that yourself as well?
Me?
Yeah.
People. I didn't-
Profanities and. Yeah.
Yeah.
We do. I mean, Mr. Chairman, I don't know if it's all right for you.
Yeah, we've opened the door. Sure.
So, Steve Howard, I'm the executive director of the VSEA. I would say that, so a couple of things to think about. The commissioner just said they have 34 people. We have 6. So we're outnumbered. And it takes us a lot longer to get through all of those cases. I think there's a couple of things that I would consider, and I'd be happy to bring in the field folks who work with us, work with DHR on this stuff every day, maybe our legal folks as well. A couple of things I just ask you to consider. One is the SEA has proposed and has asked the administration in past rounds of bargaining, which we're not asking the legislature to do. Can't ask the legislature to give us anything we haven't gotten in bargaining, but we've asked for time limits. And the reason for that is because our members, who are often accused, these are allegations, are often cleared. But meanwhile, they're sitting on they're sitting out on TRD. Their coworkers are wondering where they are. Their families wondering why they're home. It's a very demoralizing, difficult thing for an employee. So we've actually asked this process to be condensed and to take less time. And also, and I think this isn't DHR's fault, and DHR doesn't have anything, they may not know, because they're sort of innocent bystanders in this process, that there's a lot of office politics that gets involved in why somebody's accused of something and why they're left on TRD forever. It may be that the manager doesn't like that person, doesn't want that person back in the workplace. There was an example in a correctional facility where it became very clear to us that a supervisor was put on TRD and left on TRD after an exemplary career in corrections, because the superintendent didn't have the same level of respect that this person did with the rank and file. So they didn't want that person in the facility because the troops were following them and not the superintendent, who has a lot less experience. So that, I think I would consider that. It's not something DHR would know. They would just get the allegations, they would investigate them. And sometimes the investigation doesn't come back the way the manager wanted it to. They'll just leave the person out there forever, just because they don't want them back in the workplace. A few years ago, we had a nurse at the vet home who was cleared by the nursing board of the allegation, but left on TRD by the vet's home. We know why she was left on TRD, but they may not know. So there needs to be a better, I don't know how you can't really root that out except to say there's a time limit on how long this takes.
Because who calls the question on it after a certain point? I mean, unless you don't have a time limit.
There is a provision in the collective bargaining agreement that says that discipline needs to be imposed promptly. The question is, what's the definition of promptly?
Well,
And I suppose that a grievance could be filed before the labor board for violation of the contract in a situation where the employee feels as though that provision is being violated. So that would be one avenue of redress that would be available to the BSEA, to a member. Hey, I've been on TRD for 16 months and the collective bargaining agreement says that discipline needs to be imposed promptly. It's a contract violation. I don't remember seeing any grievance like that. I'm not begging for one either, but.
And how long would it take for the VLRB to issue
Well,
a decision on that?
that's all, and that's something that's another issue that the auditor.
I think we're getting on target. One more.
Can I just ask one final question of, I think this may be for Tom, which is, you see the cases that finally need to be investigated and resolved. How many of those do you think would have been prevented had there been a preventive action taken by a preventive manager or a mediator? I don't, I've never heard this term of art. I've heard the term of art as a mediator, but not as a preventive manager. To me, management is a proactive, positive thing. Good management would mean you wouldn't. Anyway, you know what I mean?
I don't know what you mean. I mean, from my perspective, what I see mostly.
How many things would not, in your opinion, having seen the cases that come to you, how many could have not come to you had they been handled better and mediated better and resolved earlier and were interpersonal or could have been fixed with a preventive management plan?
I think that's a really hard question to answer. I don't know how to answer that question. I mean,
do you think, most know these cases, so that's the reason I asked you.
Many of the cases that we see involve allegations of very serious misconduct.
Yeah.
And I don't think that performance management would address serious misconduct, stealing from the state, putting people at risk,
sexual assault,
violence in the workplace, sexual.
So you see that by the time it gets to
discrimination, racial discrimination, those kinds of things are misconduct.
And
they can't be addressed by performance management.
And even if even if you have a serious allegation, if you have allegation of sexual harassment or racial discrimination, we are going to very take those allegations very
No, I
seriously. We're not,
appreciate that.
you don't. It would be unusual not to investigate allegations that come to us and saying, in that sense.
Thanks. Yeah, no, of course, by the time it gets, it just strikes me that some of them,
I think that we do a good job of weeding out allegations that come to us that we think can be dealt with through
productively,
performance management. I think we do a good job of that now.
Your question might be better addressed to the appointing or authorities than the HR. I think the HR,
no, and the
it
auditor.
comes in their lap and they have to go from there, but that's just, okay. Again, thank you very much for your time today and, please come back when it's budget time
All right.
and, we will do our best to, show the folks next door our support.
Thank you.
Where did our wonderful report from you go?
The workforce
Here.
report?
Oh,
No, our wonderful
Senator
report,
Hartnett.
our performance report. What do you call it?
I have a feeling it might be in a desk.
Okay.
He didn't
I-
pass that around.
No, we'd love a copy.
Thank you, Nikki. It was nice to meet
You
you.
might be- Wow, the archivist knows all of them. Yeah.
Maybe I'll get-
it reading around.
What do you mean? Okay, if we took a 10-minute break?
I just.
He knew